Committee on Procedures and House Affairs for the first session of the 42nd Parliament. This meeting is being held in public and is televised. And before we start, I'd like to acknowledge our honorable veteran chair of the committee, Mr. Joe Preston, and I begged him on hands and knees to take the chair right now, but he wouldn't, so I think we should welcome him. The first business today is the supplementary estimate C for 2015-16, followed by an examination of the federal appointees, the last of the federal appointees to the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments, and finally for some committee business. So, I will, let's vote. I'll just turn it over to the speaker, right? So I will now call vote 3C under Parliamentary Protective Service of the Supplementary Estimate C for 2015 to 2016. Our witnesses are the Honourable Jeff Regan, Speaker of the House of Commons, and Superintendent Michael Duhem, Director of Parliamentary Protective Service. And just so Mr. Speaker and committee members know, we also, for later this spring, have the main estimates. So you'll probably be back. This is just for this supplementary on this one part of your department, Mr. Speaker. So the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. It's been a long time since I've sat at this end of the table. But I'm very pleased to be here this morning to discuss the Parliamentary Protective Services Supplementary Estimate C, or the SUP-Cs as we call them, for 2000. The people who have come with him today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To my left here, I have Charlotte Hibbert, who's part of our communication team, followed by Sloan Mask, who's our Chief Financial Officer, and Mr. Jean Fogg, who's responsible for all a component with to do with HR for PPS, and Melissa Rusk, who's the Executive Assistant with regards to strategic planning and ethics and quality control and development.
Comme vous avez dit, Monsieur le Président, Monsieur Michael Duhem est le surintendant principal et directeur du service de protection.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have with us Michel Duhem, Parliamentary Protective Service Director. I'll just give you a moment to put on your earpieces for the interpretation. Thank you. The interpretation, as usual, is excellent. Sometimes I'm going to use the acronym PPP to refer to the Parliamentary Protective Service.
The SUP-Cs for the PPS total just over $17 million. I'll provide you with an overview of the items as follows. First, Parliament Hill Security Model Enhancements. Second, Parliamentary Protective Service Transition and Establishment Initiatives. And third, Employee Benefit Plans. Before I start, I must stress that for security purposes, of course, I'll be a bit limited in the level of operational detail that I can provide or that we can provide. But I thank you in advance for your understanding of this. As you know, the PPS is quite new, having been established by statute on June 23, 2015. The service is responsible for all matters relating to physical security throughout our parliamentary precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill. The Speaker of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Commons are responsible for administrative oversight and providing general policy direction to the service, which is under the operational control and management of its director, Mr. Duhem, a member of the RCMP. The governance was designed in this matter so that both speakers could ensure the powers, privileges, rights, and immunities of the Senate and House and their respective members remain paramount in the delivery of enhanced protective services. The need for greater operational coordination among the security partners has long been identified as a priority. In fact, Mr. Chairman, in 2007, the Senate, House of Commons, and RCMP created the Master Security Planning Office to achieve just that. Recommendations from the Auditor General and various parliamentary committees further reinforced the need for integration. But of course, prompted by the events of October 22, 2014, members of the House of Commons adopted a motion calling upon the speakers of both chambers to invite the RCMP to lead operational security throughout the precinct and the grounds of Parliament Hill, while respecting the privileges, immunities, and powers of the respective houses, and ensuring the continued employment of our existing and highly respected parliamentary security staff. This culminated in the creation of the PPS 7 months ago. With that, the RCMP's Parliament Hill Security Unit and the protective services of the Senate and House were formally integrated. The establishment of the PPS was a significant step forward in removing silos among the three security partners. Each, of course, brings unique expertise to the partnership, and as the organization works to fully complete its transition to a single and fully unified entity, our ability to protect senators, members, staff, and visitors, all of which are vitally important to all of us, is enhanced. Aujourd'hui, l'SPP a toute la capacité
Today, the PPS has the ability to protect in an efficient and effective way employees on the Hill. Since it was created, it has implemented various initiatives to improve and increase interoperability and security, as well as integration within the parliamentary precinct and on the grounds of Parliament Hill. The PPS focus is on deploying resources in a manner that effectively uses the range of expertise that already exists within the current complement of employees. This integration is further strengthened by the implementation of a single command oversight mechanism, the formalization of an intelligence unit, and general improvements to information sharing in threat detection and coordination.
Slowly, for the benefit of our wonderful interpreters, I normally speak at about 200 words a minute, with gusts up to 400. As well, Defence Research and Development Canada is currently completing a review to inform the physical security infrastructure within the precinct. Their objective is to provide research-based advice for the PPS to consider as it moves forward. At the same time, the PPS, along with the Senate Corporate Security Directorate and the House of Commons Corporate Security Office, is establishing security awareness initiatives aimed at ensuring parliamentarians, our employees, administrative staff, and all others who provide us support here on Parliament Hill know exactly what to do during an emergency, something we can all see the benefit of. Finally, the PPS is currently establishing specific policies and procedures that will effectively support the service's work. While the former Senate and House of Commons Protection Services and the RCMP are now an integrated unit, the PPS is still very much an organization in transition, which brings me to the content of the sub-Cs. As the transition continues, the PPS remains committed to enhancing security awareness and exercising stewardship over all of its resources through operational efficiencies, capacity development, and by enhancing interoperability. As noted earlier, the total amount in these estimates is just over $17 million for security model enhancements, transition, and establishment initiatives, as well as employee benefit plans. I'll first discuss the Parliament Hill Security Model Enhancement. The amount required is $14.4 million for the PPS to maintain an enhanced posture on Parliament Hill that is reflective of the current and evolving threat environment. This is essentially, as I understand it, funds that are basically being transferred from the responsibility of the RCMP over to the House. Right? As of June 23, 2015, the responsibility for the RCMP Parliament Hill detachment was effectively transferred to the PPS. The $14.4 million will stabilize the RCMP's human and financial resources dedicated to support the enhanced security model on Parliament Hill and throughout our parliamentary precinct. En deuxième lieu, on demande 2,5.
Second is an amount of $2.5 million for the Parliamentary Protective Service transition and establishment initiatives. This funding supports establishment initiatives required for PPS to become an independent parliamentary entity. As well, the funding is used to manage the transition to a unified service and develop an organization structure that is aligned with PSS's mandate. This includes telecommunications, computers, software licenses, project management fees, as well as new full-time equivalents to support operations and corporate functions such as information technology management, corporate finance, and human resources.
$275,532 needed for employee benefit plans, a statutory cost currently borne by the PPS. In conclusion, I'd like to thank every member of the PPS for their service. I must say that this morning when I arrived at the back door of the center block, in fact, at about 7 minutes to 7, normally the doors open at 7. I was really pleased this morning that someone was there actually open it a few minutes early at about 7 minutes to 7. So that was much appreciated by me, as the work of our service always is. J'aimerais également vous remercier une fois de me.
I would also like to thank you once more for giving me the opportunity to present the Parliamentary Protective Service Supplementary Estimate C. Chief Superintendent Duhem and I will be pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
We really appreciate the great work you're doing in the House. And our first questioner will be Ms. Taylor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Reagan, and thank you, Mr. Duhem. Feel free to answer in English, but I would prefer to put my questions in French. First, thank you for the services you provide here on Parliament Hill. Before I was a member, I worked with the RCMP in Moncton. In fact, that was 24 years. So I really appreciate the work you do, and I recognize that members often face dangers, and we ourselves experience a tragic event shortly before your arrival on the Hill. I would like to know whether you can give us an overview of what protection services were like before the October 22nd event and what changes have been brought in as a result of that event to ensure everybody is better protected. First, thank you for your kind words about the RCMP. I took up my new duties on June 23rd when the legislation was changed. Before that, we had 3 distinct organizations. Everything outside of the buildings was of the purview of the RCMP up to Wellington Street. And on the House side, we had the House of Commons Protective Services, which reported to the Sergeant at Arms. And on the Senate side, it was the Corporate Security Directorate. There were challenges, but as was said, Mr. Chairman, efforts had already been made in the past to integrate these 3 bodies. I won't get into the details of what challenges exist to merge 3 different organizations. Obviously, there are challenges with regard to culture and communications. The new legislation was adopted, and this created a single protective entity. Our first objective for this year is operability within the PPS. We're doing many things now which were not done in the past. For instance, one of the recommendations that came after the tragic events of October 22nd was that now everyone can communicate on the same channel, and that was not the case in the past. So that's a good thing, and we are doing this on a daily basis. Now, exchanges between people, I'll use the word in English. Situational awareness is much better now. There are weekly meetings with those who are responsible for all operations taking place on that day, and the information is disseminated to everyone on the ground after that. So we all know what's going on outside of Parliament Hill, and that is shared on the inside. As PPS moves forward, we are going to have new uniforms for this new uniformed service. We're hoping this will happen in the summer. I also talked about a change in culture. Well, when three different organizations merge, a new culture takes years to develop. I don't even know if I'll still be around when the new culture is fully in place. But we're moving forward, small steps. We're moving into new office space, and people from the three services will actually be able to talk to each other, share the same space. They will share briefing rooms. They'll have the same uniform, and that's all going to help to build the new culture. If I understand correctly, you're in charge of all three services? Within the Parliamentary Protective Service, or PPS, the RCMP is going to stay as is, and we'll keep on wearing the RCMP uniform, and we'll still be subject to the RCMP Code of Conduct, Code of Ethics, and operational rules. But the three of us, the three bodies, will follow the same set of processes. So PPS will be trained a certain way, will respond to incidents a certain way in a unified manner, and that's what we're heading towards. So are the tasks different for these three bodies within the PPS? Well, at a certain level, yes, in some ways. Some positions will be static, will remain the same as they are now, but other positions will change. But I don't think there's going to be any major differences in that regard. One of the questions I asked you earlier was regard to communications. Now that everyone is on the same wavelength, on the same channel, what of communication? Well, we now have a system which allows everyone to talk on the same frequency at the flick of a switch. And in fact, we put this into practice several times when everybody needs to be, as it were, on the same wavelength, or to be alerted about a potential incident or a fire alarm. We flick the switch and everybody can communicate. Eventually, we want to be on the same channel all the time. I understand that before, each organization had its own channel, had its own habits. It's hard to change these habits. But again, we're moving in the right directions. We went from 3 channels to 2, and we're moving towards 1. Without revealing anything you cannot reveal, what are the challenges with regard to integration? What are your biggest challenges with regard to the integration of the 3 forces? Well, I would say that really, it's a matter of changing the culture. Any organizational change, especially when it comes to this type of integration, well, a percentage of people are for, a percentage of people will follow, and a percentage is completely against the new situation. So I think it's really important to communicate properly and to get the right people to put out messages. You can't get someone who is against integration to communicate. I believe that very few people are against these new changes. Twice a week, I walk around the Hill, I talk to people on the ground, and I'm told that the morale is good. At 8 in the morning, I ask people how our men and women on the ground are feeling, and generally speaking, morale is good. We've only been in existence for 8 months. It hasn't even been a year yet, so it's going to take a little longer. But as I said, I think the biggest challenge is a change in culture.
Schmal now for questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for all you do, and Monsieur Duhem, for everything you and your brave women and men do on a daily basis for us. I just have a couple questions. First off, you had mentioned a few times about a new culture, and I was wondering if you could just quickly expand on that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, well, for starters, thank you for the kind comments. When I'm referring to a new culture, is having PPS having its own distinct culture, and I think that will come with time. And it'll come with our integrated teams that are working together. We have several integrated teams, and once the message gets out, Because I kid you not, when there's some comments were made when the RCMP came in, there's a certain apprehension that the RCMP be coming in and changing everything around, and that's by far that wasn't the way we wanted to proceed. We have everybody involved from the bottom up that's involved in different committees. We look at the response on different surveys we have. It's fairly high, so people are engaged. It's just developing that own unique culture that exists, because even within Parliament right now, there's a different culture on the Senate side and the House of Commons side, and it shows also in the security of the protection services that were there before. So it's just coming out and bringing, and I'm saying the RCMP also, putting the RCMP culture aside, putting the old Senate and House of Commons culture, and bringing PPS having their own culture.
Right.
So it's a work in progress.
Absolutely. I remember after the incident of October 2014 and reading about the fact that everyone was on different frequencies and not really able to speak with each other. I thought that was quite surprising. So I'm glad that is being addressed, because that is very important. In terms of just general continuing to evaluate security, a few weeks ago on a Wednesday, we were having a caucus and the fire alarm went off twice. And it seemed the same procedure, I would think, and it was mentioned that if anyone was kind of watching or wanting to do bad things, we did the exact same thing twice. Is there plans to address that at all?
There's probably one thing you didn't notice, and is when there's contingency plans in place within PPS when something like that happens. So without going into details, our posture, some of the positions on the Hill will slightly change to ensure the protection of the people when they're gathered like that. I would have to bring your point up to the CSO's office, Corporate Security Office, who's responsible right now for everything to do with the fire evacuation plan. And we work jointly on several initiatives, and it's something that we could look at. If there's two alarms back to back, is there a willingness to have two separate sites when we evacuate? So I'll bring it up with Mr. Pat McDonnell.
Perfect. Yeah, I would appreciate that. I'm just curious, just as an observer, and we're all standing out there, so I appreciate you doing that. In terms of, excuse me, the public grounds, I remember after one of my biggest, well, another fear, but just a concern I had after October 2014, I'm glad it didn't happen, is kind of a reaction to that kind of thing is to kind of shut things off and keep the public out. I'm glad to hear that tours resumed shortly thereafter, within a couple of weeks, and precautions were made and that sort of thing to ensure this ground stays open to the public, because it is a public building. We are officials of the public. So I was wondering if you could comment at all or bring up just what other measures are being taken, or without going too many details, but just allowing the public to have access to this place, to this building and the grounds.
I'd say, other than the posture, the security posture on the Hill following the events, nothing much as for access to the visitors, tourists, to the grounds, to the public has changed. We don't prevent them from going anywhere. It's the same access what they had before, and it's that challenge of balancing the bringing in security measures and the freedom of people to roam around on the Hill. So as far as other than posture, security posture has changed slightly. But accessibility to the Hill hasn't changed whatsoever. If the tours maintain the tours where they go across the street to get the tickets, and then they go through a screening process before they enter Parliament, and certain days where we limit the tours, we do limit the tours and numbers during the regular days also, the number of people in the tours. But as far as accessibility, nothing has changed. We're waiting for, as the Speaker mentioned, we do a lot of work with DRDC. PPS, along with the Corporate Security Office, along with the Corporate Security Director to the Senate and DRDC, we've asked to have a review of the entire Hill itself and look at everything that you can think of security-wise. As you know, with the closures, the upcoming closure of the Hill, we want to see what can be brought forward to ensure, I'm not going to say a better security, maybe an enhanced security.
You mean the closure of Center Block? We said the Hill.
Center Block, sorry. Meant Center Block. Thank you, sir.
I didn't think they were closing the whole Hill.
We knew what he meant. Well, thank you for your ongoing efforts to make sure that the public still has access to the precinct. quickly, just on another note, we paid a lot of attention to us here in the Hill, which is important as well. But also, I also think back to our constituency staff. Will there be ongoing evaluations of how our offices are set up, or any measures we can put in place to help those people off-site?
That, sir, would fall under the responsibility of the corporate security officer, or office, and that would be Mr. Pat McDonough, who's
Our Sergeant-at-Arms.
Sergeant at Arms, who's the constituency office falls under his responsibility.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
Should we ask him?
if you wish.
Sure, I wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Sorry, Pat.
Introduce yourself for the
Sergeant
record.
at Arms Pat McDonnell. Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, Pat McDonnell. I'm Deputy Sergeant at Arms and in charge of the Corporate Security Office. And in response to your question, a project team that looks after constituency office security. We have funds set aside for enhancements, if required, to constituency offices. We have contractors out there that will do assessments of the constituency office, and my team will also, from time to time, do assessments of the constituency office security setup.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And I'll more information on that.
Thank you,
I think that's my time.
And Mr. Christofferson.
Thanks very much, Chair. First off, my apologies, especially to you, Speaker, for being late. I was at another committee buried in 112 North. I wouldn't want you to think in any way I was being rude to your presence, sir, but it was unavoidable. I got here as quick as I could. Can I also, and I know there's already been a shout out, but I just want to mention also how good it is to see Mr. Preston here. Him and I have a great history together on this committee, and I can only say to you, Chair, that you've got big shoes to fill, and not just size-wise. He did an excellent job, and again, I underscore it was his use of his own personal sense of humor that got us through a lot of very, very difficult moments. So great to see you, Joe, and I understand you're having a great retirement, well earned. I have to declare right at the outset here, I mean, I'll be supporting this because it's the right thing to do in the context of the framework that's here, but I just need to take this moment, because there aren't many left, to say how much I strongly and profoundly disagree with the whole concept of this parliamentary protective service. There is a reason that we have the separation of powers in a democracy, a separation between the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. And nowhere does that separation of power, in my opinion, manifest itself more in an obvious way than in Parliament and the way that we conduct ourselves in Parliament. When Parliament has a crisis, we turn to you, Speaker, not the Prime Minister. Parliament's issues are Parliament's. The difficulty here, and by way of background, I need to say that having been a former Solicitor General in Ontario, I was also the civilian head of the OPP. Worked very closely with my RCMP counterparts. In fact, as a minister, I was invited and attended the training center in Regina. So I have the utmost respect for the RCMP. This is not about the RCMP in any way, shape, or form. This is about the structure of our democracy and whether or not this supports that or goes against it. In my view, it goes against it because, given the fact that Parliament, if we think of it with the Auditor General does not answer to the Prime Minister. The Auditor General does not answer to a minister. The Auditor General answers to Parliament, and only Parliament can hire and fire an agent of Parliament. And that's a good example of that separation of powers. There's a reason why, historically, I might also add that I spent some time on the Speaker's Security Committee from Queen's Park because of my background, and we actually visited here when we examined beefing up security at Queen's Park because of some issues that had happened. So I understand the complexities that we're dealing with, how you've got the city police involved to a certain degree, and then you've got the RCMP involved, and then you get to the front door of Parliament, and it's the parliamentary security staff, and now we've taken two of those things and merged them together, and it's wrong. It's wrong. wrong, wrong, wrong. And here's why, Speaker, in my opinion. The RCMP now are responsible for determining what happens in the direction of people in Parliament who are the only ones authorized to carry guns, which are now the security staff in the House of Commons. And when I say that, I also mean the joint entity of the Senate. And I have no problem with joining those two together. That makes all the sense in the world. It's this business now. And I say this because I see this as a serious, potentially dangerous threat, not an imminent threat. But as you know, everything went along. On October the 21st, we had no idea the world was about to change from a security point of view the next day. So when you examine these things without a crisis, it sounds like you're getting caught up in splitting hairs and semantics. I view this very differently. To me, it's a very serious matter that it's not you, Speaker, that directs any longer. You may, at a certain level, direct the security within Parliament, but now the RCMP have a say. The RCMP will decide. And the problem with that is that Parliament is independent of the government, and yet the people that control the security folks around us, and the only ones that have guns, are the government. And to me, it's that crossing of the lines. We have crossed the line between the separation between the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. The legislative is now not responsible for our own security. Our security now is responsible by virtue of the executive. Well, if you study your history, and Speaker, I saw your interview over Christmas. I was really impressed, by the way. I didn't know you that well. I'd like that. You'll appreciate the importance of understanding what has happened in history and what happens at other parliaments. And there's a reason why we don't go past the bar in the Senate and why they have to knock on the door to come in. And it all goes back to people's heads being chopped off and, being told, you're saying something I don't like to hear, and their head gets chopped off, and we have had kings had their head chopped off. This is serious stuff. And I really I feel so badly. I think it's so wrong that we've now allowed that crossing of the lines, that the control of anything that is actually the 100% purview of the legislative arm now is overlapped by the exercising of authority by the executive. And again, it only manifests itself when you're in crisis. And I hate to think that crisis could ever happen, but the older I get, the more I realize anything can happen in this old world. And this business that the Prime Minister now dictates what happens to the security in the House of Commons, to me, is the antithesis of the separation of powers. I don't believe, I got 1 minute, yeah, I knew that, that's okay. I had to get this off my chest. And I know I'm not the only one. I know Mr. Belanger and the Conservatives, a respected statesperson in our Parliament, feels exactly the same way. So I've left next to no time. I really wasn't looking for an answer. I just needed to get that off my chest. But Speaker, I don't know how far you can go in your thoughts, but I'd be interested in any you might have in the fraction of moments I've left.
In the 15 seconds I have available.
30 seconds.
Well, because this is your time, and I recognize that, and I understand how committees work, obviously. In that regard, I'm the servant of the House, and so as the House directs, I will follow. Having said that, I think it's important to understand that what we're doing today, in fact, has to do with this. We are moving $14.4 million from the budget of the RCMP onto the budget of the House through the estimates, basically bringing those employees fully under the House. Mr. Duhem, the superintendent of the PPS, reports to me and to the Speaker of the Senate. So that's how it works within the PPS. But as I say, first of all, I want to make it very clear that I value and appreciate your perspective on this. And it's an important perspective. And as I said before, if the House decides to direct me differently in terms of how I, on behalf of the House, interact on this issue with the Senate, et cetera, then so be it. I will take that direction as I'm required to do, obviously. But I think there's an argument that we have it's obvious that you would agree that it was important to have interoperability, that it was important to have a better communication and a better unification within the precinct and on Parliament Hill. And that's what's been attempted to achieve. If there are better ways to achieve it, then I think it's important to have a debate, and this is one of the good places that debate could be held.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
It's the one time I get to turn your microphone off. Mr. Chan.
No, actually, it
Oh.
was Mr. Graham.
Mr. Graham?
No, it's Manager.
Oh, Ms. Vanderbilt. Okay.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you. We really appreciate the protective services and the fact that you are there, not just in terms of the precinct and grounds, but also for us as members of Parliament and our staff. Very much appreciate the hard work. I am interested. I'm a local MP here in Ottawa. And so I'm particularly interested. I know that there's a lot of the money in the supplemental estimates. This is for the integration of the 3 different services. But I'd like to know a little bit more about how that integration is working with the Ottawa Police Force. Because when there are security threats, either to us as members or, you know, in general, people who wish to do harm, they don't stop at the boundaries of the parliamentary precinct. And so is there, you talked about the same frequencies, and what have you done in terms of integrating with Ottawa Police?
The October 22nd was particular in the sense that it started off the boundaries, off the parameters, if you want, of Parliament Hill. If the incident was on Parliament Hill itself, I think it'd be much easier in the sense that any incident on Parliament Hill we treat it as national security, a national security matter, so then we'd call the RCMP. We're working throughout the recommendations that were put forth. I've met with the Chief of Police of Ottawa Police Service through different committees. I've met with my equivalent in the Ottawa during a meeting, and this further up meeting is how we integrate all that together, because the very first step that we wanted to do is understand how PPS was going to function. So we integrating 3 units it's not done overnight, because you have to put in a command and control structure. You have to make sure that the policy and the way you're going to respond are okay. You have to have maybe a couple of tabletop exercises to make sure you're heading down the right track before you invite other people to come and play in your sandbox. So we're not quite there yet. But it's like anything to do with partnerships. You need these the meetings. You need the tabletop exercise to hash it out and work it out. So.
On that, in terms of security, and this may be to the Deputy Sergeant at Arms, in terms of the security in the constituency offices, obviously that also has a lot of impact with local police. I mean, in my case, it's Ottawa Police, but I mean, we have all the local police forces in every constituency across the country. So I'm interested to know, because, for instance, if there's one individual, that individual may harass or follow a member of Parliament here on the Hill to their home, to their constituency. And so, you know, we've got on the Hill, it would be the protective services, the constituencies under the Sergeant at Arms, and then if you're at your home, it would be under the local police. So how would that integrate? How do those different things speak to one another?
We have an outreach program. I write each chief of police personally, and I give the constituency office address for them to flag, and they'll flag it. And in this new Parliament, we haven't had a chance yet to go out to all the MPs and ask to share their residence address with the local police, but that's also flagged if the MP allows us to flag it. And the cooperation with the police forces to date has been more than excellent. If a person is brought to our attention, we immediately share it with PPS. We're the touch point for PPS, and then PPS takes it from there and turns it over to a specialized section within the RCMP, and they liaise with the local police. Would that be correct, Mike?
Yeah. It's important to note that PPS doesn't have an investigative mandate. It's strictly protection of the grounds and the precinct. So we don't get involved in any investigation. We'll act as a conduit, if you wish, with regards to whatever pops up, but we do not investigate.
In terms of our residences, then, if there is a flag with the local police, would there be, let's say something happens on the grounds, would there be something where the local police would get that flag and see instantly if there's been an incident through one of the others, through the constituency office, through the Hill office? Is there a way that you can make sure that is communicated so that they're not going in blind? They see a flag, but they don't know the background or why, or if there's a particular individual involved?
To what Pat mentioned, that there's a liaison that's done with the local police. So if there is a threat, if there's a threat on an individual, on a member of parliament, we ensure through the intel unit that the information is shared, so that, as Pat mentioned with regards to the red flag, so that if there is a call at that address, a red flag should pop up and saying that this is what's going on.
And in terms of our own personal security, are there mechanisms for members of parliament and their staff to learn about ways that we can, change our behavior or protect ourselves or take precautionary measures to ensure that we don't make ourselves more vulnerable than we would need to be? Is there any mechanism for that kind of awareness raising or training?
Pat,
Yes, there's a security awareness program, and there will be information sessions coming up for the staff and for the members of parliament if they so choose to attend.
And would that apply for constituency staff as well?
The constituency staff could attend. The sessions will be in Ottawa.
Okay.
One of the recommendations should be that it's good to have some food in your office. My staff discovered on that fateful day, October 22nd, I wasn't in the office that day, and they discovered, of course, that they were there from 10 o'clock in the morning till 8:40 at night. Fortunately, there was a certain number of granola bars in my credenza that they found. So I recommend keeping some of those on hand for other reasons as well, obviously.
And in terms of the constituency offices, are there best practices or things that we can implement? Like, for instance, I'm having a counter put into my constituency office so that the front desk isn't just open and people can't just run all the way to the back to, for instance, where my office is. Is there somewhere these kind of practices can be gathered and shared, and so members of parliament don't have to reinvent that each time? Is there...
Yes, that's my security assessment team, and they'll share those best practices. And I should add that even though the sessions aren't in Ottawa, that team's available all the time to speak with the constituency offices and give them tips. And we're also improving our web page so people can visit the web page and it'll all be there. So there's all sorts of little tips that the staff can follow.
Okay, and would that apply for our residences as well?
No, there's nothing developed for the residences yet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Where would they find the website?
On the House of Commons site.
Mr. Richards.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions I have, I guess, today. Thanks for the presentations. And wanted to ask just about the $2.5 million for the PPS transition and establishment initiatives. So it indicates there there's some new full-time equivalents being put in place to support operations and corporate functions. It talks about purchases of telecommunications, computer, software licenses, project management fees. So obviously that sounds to me as though that's administrative functions that the new full-time equivalents would be doing. Wondered if you could just kind of confirm that, if I'm correct in that understanding. And then also I'll just ask a couple other questions. You can answer them all at once. I would assume that therefore the telecommunications, the computers, et cetera, would be to support the administrative staff that would be hired. How many new administrative staff is that talking about? And then obviously the next question would be, transition and establishment initiatives would sort of indicate that it likely be temporary employment. Is that what we're talking about here, or are these permanent new full-time equivalents? If you can give us a sense as to the answer to that.
I'll go through the 2.4 million really just on the operational side. Other than the 14.4, operationally for the the remaining of the funds is operation-wise is with regards to our scanners. As you enter center block downstairs, all the visitors go through a scanning. But during one of our reviews, it was determined that in certain areas on the Senate side, we had constables doing the scanning, so it was more cost efficient having someone who's not armed doing that type of work. And it's in the vision of having the scanning done by one unit instead of having people doing 2-3 different jobs. So that's a chunk of that money is in there. We're looking at phase 2 with regards to the uniforms is also in that 2.4. There's some equipment. There's a small contingency for overtime. Parental leave and performance pay is in that too. As for temporary and permanent employment, right now everybody's temporary. As we're building the org chart, We're starting to create these positions that are going to be submitted to the Speaker for both speakers for approval. And I'd say what we looked at as we're building the structure is what do we want to maintain under PPS and what can be serviced out to either the House of Commons or Senate. So that's, as we're progressing, that's a little bit the thought process that was going through as we're building the structure. But nothing permanent yet. But you are right when you were saying it's with regards to bringing people in. Well, they need computers, they need office space, they need a desk and whatnot. So.
Okay, but I had misunderstood it a bit. Like, it isn't completely administrative. You're talking about essentially some of those full-time equivalents are actually people to run the scanners, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
In that 2.4, yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned uniforms, and I think you said it was even part of this 2.5 million new uniforms. You mentioned in your opening remarks as well. You mentioned briefing rooms being shared with the various services. When do you expect that to actually take place or occur?
Well, I'm not going to say when the uniforms are supposed to come in, but we're hoping by April the uniforms are in. We're hoping by September 2016 that PPS, other than the executive and the officer cadre, but most of the team move into our new location, and which I was mentioning earlier with regards to integration. Everybody would be housed in the same building. And the concept of operation we want to bring forward is that when people come in, change new uniform, up their briefing room where they're given a daily briefing of activities that are going on in the Hill and what they need to know, and then off to their posts. So that, according to Public Works, is we should have the building by September 2016.
Okay.
Or it might even before.
Time for one more question, Mr. Chair?
Okay, quick one.
Yeah. Okay, I know that sometimes it can be difficult to share a lot in terms of when we talk about intelligence, but you do mention, or there was mention in the Speaker's opening remarks about the formalization of an intelligence unit and improvements to information sharing and threat detection. What can you tell us about those? I understand that there's probably some things that you can't.
No, basically when PPS was created, the RCMP had their own little intelligence unit. House of Commons Protective Security had their own, and Senate had their own. So what we did was we just brought all three people together and created an intel unit. And it's more to do that they're not collecting intel on the Hill. They're collecting intel outside and collecting is a big word. They're more part of daily meetings with the RCMP or OPS, or if there's any demos, just to feed us so we can have a better situational awareness of what's going on the Hill. So then from there, I informed both the CSO's office, the CSD office, and the respective speakers. So,
okay, and real briefly,
Okay.
how does that information, of course, then get to the officers that are sort of on the front line from there?
It's if it's worthwhile sharing with everyone because it's an impact for the Hill itself. We'll make sure that everybody gets it. It's through we've done it in the past through an email. We've done it where it's done in briefings and whatnot. That's normally how we share it.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, and thanks for your indulgence, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Regan, and Mr. McDonald, Deputy Sergeant-at-Arms, and Michael Duhem. We feel like we're in safe hands. Certainly appreciate that, and thank you for coming this morning. I know you're all very busy, and so now you can go back and protect us some more, and we'll have our vote. So shall vote 3C carry? Anyone opposed? Carried. Shall I report the vote on the supplementary estimates to the House? Any disagreement? Okay. Our next guest is available, but we'll just suspend for a minute so we can get the hookup going.
Hello, Mrs. Namorisa.
We'll continue now with our third and final examination of appointees to the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments. I remind members that in accordance with Standing Order 110 and 111, this committee is to examine the qualifications and competence of the appointee to perform the duties of the post to which he or she has been appointed. Our witness this morning is Dr. Indira Samarascara, who is appearing by video conference from Vancouver. Yeah.
Good morning.
Is it the case?
Good morning. Thank you.
Is it the case that we will have time to discuss the motion I had on the floor regarding witnesses, bringing them back in order to question them on the actual work they're doing?
Yeah, we have committee business at the end of the meeting, so if that's what people want to discuss, yeah.
That is what I want to discuss. Thank you.
So, Doctor, you have up to 10 minutes for an opening statement, and then we will get questions from each of the parties that are here. Thank you for appearing.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here, and I will make my comments very brief because I'm sure committee members would have questions. You have my CV in front of you. Just at a high level, my qualifications, and then I'll move on to perhaps some competencies and qualities that I might bring to this task. I'm an engineer by training. I have been an academic all of my career. I came to Canada in 1977 to pursue a PhD in metallurgical engineering, and I became a Canadian citizen in 1980. I was a professor for 20 years, and then I became Vice President of Research at the University of British Columbia, and then I went on to serve 2 terms as President and Vice Chancellor of University of Alberta. I'm currently a Senior Advisor in the Policy Group of Bennett Jones. I serve on a number of corporate boards, nonprofit boards, and other volunteer activities. In terms of my career, I have also had extensive experience working with the Government of Canada in my capacity as President, and the governments of Alberta and British Columbia. In terms of qualities and competencies, let me start with competencies. I have, as President and Vice Chancellor, I have had to develop the ability to deal with a great deal of complexity, broadened my expertise. I've had to develop an ability to function independent, have an independentness of thought and approach. I have not been involved in any political activities or been a member of any political party. I'd like to think that I have high integrity. I have a reputation, certainly, of an individual with integrity. I'm someone who has good judgment. I've developed and improved my capability of good judgment. And finally, I have, in my position, had to maintain a very, very high degree of confidentiality. As you can imagine, I'm exposed to the files of students, of faculty, of staff. I'm privy to confidential information from governments around budgets and policy, and that's something that I have executed in my job. So with that, I think I'll stop and again hand it back to you, Chair. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here this morning.
Okay, and thank you very much for appearing. And we'll start the round with Mr. Chan.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Samasakura, for appearing before us. I know that it's still relatively early in the morning Vancouver time, so we appreciate you making yourself available. I wanted to start with, and it in some ways obviously reflects a little bit about your background and in looking at your curriculum vitae. Clearly, it is a very significant period of public service, particularly through your record with the universities. But I wanted to get a sense, for example, and you talked about issues about competency and knowledge. Of course, given that you've been appointed to an advisory board that deals with the appointment of future public officials, do you have particularly any views or any experience in particular with respect to constitutional matters in your past dealings? Did you particularly deal with elements as a university president, for example, with the division of powers? And do you have any particular thoughts as it relates to the operation between a bicameral parliament that operates between both a combination of members that are elected, namely those of us in the House of Commons, and those that are in an appointed body, namely the one that you will be advising on, appointing future members or making recommendations that will appoint future potential senators?
Thank you. So I'm obviously not an expert on any of this, but in my role all, as President and Vice Chancellor, I have had to develop a really good understanding of how the Government of Canada works. I have spent a great deal of time in Ottawa, interacting with both members of Parliament, cabinet ministers, deputy ministers, public service officials, and I've also had the opportunity to interact with many senators. So through that work, I have developed, I would say, a sophisticated understanding of the bicameral governance and also a good understanding of the division of powers between the elected members of Parliament and the Senate. So that's my response on that.
Okay, well, thank you. Again, I note that you've obviously served in many distinguished academic and professional capacities, Doctor, in the past, and of course have been. I do note that you've been awarded a significant number of in addition to earning a number of degrees, been awarded a significant number of honorary distinctions and various public service distinction awards throughout your career. Perhaps in any of your boards and committee work, Doctor, does that in any way, from your perspective, help inform you with respect to the type of work that you would be doing on behalf of this advisory body? And I also wanted to get a sense in terms of your relationship with the government. Was there any sort of particular understanding that you had with respect to the kind of advice that you would be ultimately providing to the minister or ultimately to the Prime Minister in terms of the kinds of recommendations that would be going forward?
So let me begin by saying, in terms of competencies to undertake this task, as you know, I've spent all my life in the business of talent management, talent assessment, and I've served on a large number of committees that select people for various awards from an academic standpoint. But let me speak to two that are not academic that perhaps have the greatest bearing on this particular task. One is that as President and Vice Chancellor for 10 years, I served on the Honorary Degree Committee for the University of Alberta. The chair of the committee is the Chancellor, and I'm the Vice Chancellor. And you can, as you know, honorary degrees are awarded to individuals from all walks of life. In fact, the criteria that we apply to honorary degree selection mirrors in some ways the task at hand. We are seeking members who have made significant contributions to their community, who have made outstanding achievements in their chosen professions. And perhaps the only thing that was missing in terms of direct comparison is knowledge of the legislative process and their ability to function in a Senate. But the Honorary Degree Committee allowed me to look at Canadians from all walks of life. So that's one experience. The other one is I also serve on the selection for the Outstanding CEO of the Year. In Canada, I've been on that committee for about 4 or 5 years, and that again is looking now at very specific competencies, individuals who are running Canadian corporations. But I think these diverse experiences have given me a context within which I will be able to assess and apply the very clear merit-based criteria that we have to adhere by. In terms of my understanding, you asked the question about with government in terms of our recommendations. Our terms of reference are very clear, the criteria are very clear, and we as a committee have spent a lot of time discussing the criteria and developing an understanding of those criteria and their application to nominations that we receive.
Thank you. I wanted to ask just one final question, and I go back into your CV, and in particularly I noted that you were appointed by the previous government to the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee on Public Service Renewal. Was there anything in there that you found, particularly in that particular work, that might be informative to the type of work that you might be doing on behalf of this advisory body?
I would say not directly, other than developing a very good understanding of the role of the public service in Canada, a good understanding of the long-term trends that Canada is facing as a country, the importance of modernizing perhaps many of our systems in support of government, everything from how we assess merit and so on in terms of public servants. So I would say a broad-based understanding and an opportunity to perhaps delve more deeply into how the government of Canada operates and the role of the public service.
That's great. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I'll pass the floor back to the chair.
Thank you. We'll now have Mr. Scott Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, welcome, Professor, or Doctor. I'm actually not sure what the right term to use is. If this was Germany, I'd call you Herr Professor Doctor and get both in the same title. At any rate, welcome to our committee. You have a very impressive CV, to say the least, and I've been saying to the other people who've appeared before us as well that it must feel a bit odd having to essentially trot out your credentials. I know that being accomplished is not the same thing as wanting to spend all your time talking about your credentials. I'll just say that from my point of view, they're very impressive. In fact, my assistant was a student at the University of Alberta while you were the big kahuna there, the president. So let me ask you a little bit about some of what you've done and how it relates to the work you do now on the advisory panel. One of the things I'm just trying to get my head around is, have you been approaching individuals or organizations and asking them to make nominations? I see that Sylvie Bernier from Quebec indicated that about 100 organizations have been approached. Is that something that the national board has been involved in, or is that something done by the provincial members only?
Again, point of order. Again, we're getting back into the issues of process as opposed to the issues of competency and qualifications.
You want to answer that question?
Yes, I'm happy to reinforce what our chair offered, but perhaps maybe add to that. One of the things we were clearly trying to do in phase one was to ensure that we got the word out very broadly, and hence we collectively as a group, and that is the 3 federal members and all of the provincial members, which are 3 provinces and 2 people each, work together to put input towards a very significant list that ensured that the message and the opportunity to nominate individuals went out everywhere. And that was really our commitment. And I think we did the best job we could. And in fact, I think when our report goes to the Prime Minister, we certainly will attempt to provide some detail, some color on that part of our activity.
This is the report, you mean making recommendations of 5 individuals per province, or do you mean the report you'll be making about how the process could be improved in the future?
The report on the process.
Okay, thank you. Just another question then with relation to this. So you then did send out requests to organizations saying, please consider making submissions, is that right? Or nominations?
Yes, we sent out the same request to large numbers of organizations.
Will you be including a copy of that request in your report? That would allow us members of the public to see what its nature was, and it would be helpful for all of us. I realize you're reporting to the Prime Minister, but obviously this is a process that involves all of us. These senators will be senators who will be governing for all of us, and we all, therefore, as members of the public, have an interest in keeping track of the process as well.
Again, I just want to object. Again, we're delving into the issues of process, Mr. Reed, and Again, I leave it up to the witness whether she wishes to answer the question, but again, we do have the minister that is appearing before this committee on Thursday, and perhaps those are questions that are more appropriately addressed to the government as opposed to this witness. Again, I again want to direct us to remember that we are directed under the standing orders 111 sub 2 to simply look at the qualifications and competency of a particular witness and not to delve into issues of process.
Doctor?
Yes, I thought maybe I'll make 2 points. First of all, we are currently working on our report, and so, I can't obviously speak to it because it's not complete by any means. But let me point to the website and the form that the organizations were asked to fill out. Perhaps that form will give you a better understanding. I mean, we've clearly said that the organizations have to present a rationale for why they are nominating the individual, and that clearly spells out the parameters that we provided to the organizations.
The number of organizations who got back to you, is that something you'd be able to share with us at this point? And if not, I'm anticipating Mr. Chan's objection. Is it the sort of thing that you intend to include in your report to the Prime Minister, indicating how many responses you actually got back?
I would simply repeat my objection again.
Doctor?
Yeah, I mean, our report is not complete, so it's difficult for me to comment because I don't know what we will collectively end up. But let me say that our, obligation at the terms of reference is to provide statistics to the Prime Minister. Beyond that, I think it's going to be too early for me to make any kind of commentary until we as a group have met and decided what we're going to do.
No, that's fair enough. I don't expect you to anticipate the things you're going to write, particularly as you'd want to discuss them with your the other members of your panel before putting them to paper. But might I make the suggestion then? This is, and now I'm offering you advice which I think is not out of order, even in Mr. Chan's mind. And it's just this: providing that information, how many groups actually got back to you would be helpful. I think you can do that without violating the restrictions that are placed in those individual forms which become protected status after they've been filled out and so on. That would be a useful information indicating whether the system is working as one would wish it to work. The chairman is signaling to me that I have only a minute left. I'll just ask then, in his testimony before the Senate committee about a week and a half ago, Minister LeBlanc indicated that you had indicated to him you needed extra time to make your decisions and pass on the names to the Prime Minister. Have you been able to pass those names on to the Prime Minister now? Is the matter in his hands, or is it still something you're reviewing?
Once again, point of order. We're asking about process over and over again, and this does not go to the qualifications or competence of the witness.
I can't hear. I think I might have.
Okay, you can. You have about 20 seconds left. You can. Anything you want to say in relation to that question?
At this point, I can say that our process is well underway, and until the process is concluded, it might be best if I left that answer to when we can finally give you some sense of timing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. David Christopherson will be the next on the list.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Doctor, for taking the time to be here and to answer our questions. Appreciate it. No surprises from me. If you've talked to colleagues or looked at the Hansard, you know exactly where I'm going. So it's all up front, and nobody's shocked here as to what's going to happen. But I do want to state very sincerely that I have no qualms or questions at all with your qualifications. They're outstanding. There's just no other way to describe that. You are an outstanding Canadian, and in terms of qualifications to do just about any task that might be asked of a citizen, I can't think of anyone that's more qualified than you are. So I have no problems or questions at all with that, except great awe for what you've achieved. However, on the side of competency, You know that it's my view that the 5 of you replace the 35 million people that otherwise would make this decision in an election. And since that's not going to happen, it seems to me competency speaks to you actually performing the job, and the job actually happens as you're doing interviews and making evaluations about citizens as to whether or not you believe they should go on the list as potential appointees under the jurisdiction, the right of the PM to appoint. So therefore, I'm asking, when you have candidates in front of you, given the importance of accountability in our system, democracy is not one way, it's two-way. There's accountability on the part of those that hold and exercise power. With that in mind, what qualities are you looking for in candidates, or what characteristics would you be seeking from those candidates to give yourself the assurance that this is someone who understands the importance of accountability in carrying out their functions as a lawmaker? We're not just appointing committee people; these are lawmakers. So, what would you be looking for to find those qualities that satisfied you that they're true Democrats, small d, that they actually believe in the tenets of democracy, and part of that being accountability?
I think I've lost the signal. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to answer the question?
Yes, please.
First of all, let me thank you for your very kind words about my achievements. I'm truly humbled and grateful for your comments. Let me make 2 points on this. First, on accountability. I'd like to say that I've spent much of my career, particularly the last 15 years, maybe the last 10 years, honing my skills on accountability, how I held people accountable within the University of Alberta, being the person who was ultimately answerable to the Board of Governors and, in fact, to the Government of Alberta on the issue of accountability as an institution, as an individual, on behalf of my executive, on behalf of management, on behalf of the academics and our staff. So I'd like to think that I understand accountability reasonably well to be able to assess that. When we are looking at candidates, our terms of reference, I think, were constructed to some degree with that in mind. One of the things that I think is evidence of an individual being able to be accountable is really what did they set out to do in their lives professionally, in their communities, if they were in positions that involved making laws or supporting individuals for making laws. We use that evidence, and this came from their CV, it came from references, it would come from the nomination by organizations collectively to say, are these individuals capable of being accountable for the task before them? And I think that were the criteria we used, and our own experience about what does it mean to be accountable at those kinds of levels to come to that conclusion.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you responding. It hasn't always been the case, and all I asked was a very simple opinion. You gave it to me. I appreciate it. Just to drill down a little deeper down this same road, one of the things that voters do on the doorstep when candidates come and knock, and again, you're a replacement for that. You're there instead of the voter. So someone is knocking on your door, and one of the things that people are looking for is to ensure that someone has the right priorities for them. But the difficulty is that what may be a priority in terms of maybe health care for one person, when they go to the next door, the priority might be democratic reform, let's say. And so those two different values would be perhaps reflected in the ballot box, where the one candidate said, I didn't hear enough about health, I'm not voting for them, and the other one says, I didn't hear enough about democratic reform, I'm not voting for them. But again, you replace that door-to-door evaluation by the voters. So what mechanism will you use when you're looking to find candidates that are balanced in their view, and that there's the right emphasis on things that matter and should be a priority, given that the difficulty with that, given that Canadians themselves have subjective opinions about what that is, and it's reflected in the vote, but that all kind of happens with the just the five of you. So how do you see yourself evaluating candidates in terms of trying to determine whether they have a well-rounded interest in the values that matter, or is it your own values that'll be the priority if you believe it's health care? How will you use, what mechanisms will you use to find candidates that would reflect that Canadian will?
Dr. Professor, you have 30 seconds left in this time slot.
Well, one of the criteria that we have been tasked with is to ensure that we have a balance of candidates. We have the issue of gender, ethnic, linguistic, minority, indigenous peoples, but also breadth of expertise in order to have a well-functioning Senate. And I think that breadth, as long as we can ensure that there is a cross-section of people with significant differences amongst them in terms of their professional and personal qualities, I think we would hopefully be able to address that issue.
To be fair, some people are looking for someone who's walked a mile in their shoes, and that may or may not be reflected in folks that have umpteen letters after their name, myself included. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And now we'll move on to David Graham for our last round.
Thank you, Dr. Samasekera. I'm pronouncing it roughly correctly. I'm looking through your national boards and committees in Canada. You've got so many that I don't know where to begin. I haven't heard of half of them. I was wondering if, by the way, I wanted to share my time with Ms. Sahuda. If I could just ask you to talk a bit more about some of these particular roles, particularly the Prime Minister's Advisory Council on Science and Technology. What did you do there, and how does it tie back to what you do now, if you could address that at all?
Thank you very much. Yes, I served on the Science Technology Innovation Council for a few years. Our role there was essentially responding to advice from the Ministry of the Minister of Industry Canada, as well as creating a report called the State of the Nation report, where we attempted to comprehensively provide the Minister and Canadians, Government of Canada, a picture of where Canada stood relative to other countries on a variety of measures. The advice to the Minister was on again, a large number of issues. The advice was confidential to the Minister, and therefore obviously not in the public domain. But I can tell you that we covered essentially topics that would be of interest to enhancing Canada's competitiveness, not only in science and technology, but also innovation and also competitiveness as a country in terms of our economic growth.
Did the last Prime Minister follow your advice?
I would say that much of our advice was indeed taken very seriously, and there were many, many occasions where the advice was implemented.
I see. What is Mars, M-A-R-S? I'm guessing it wasn't the planet. So if you could tell us a bit. Yeah, but what is it? I don't know anything about Mars. Okay, if you can tell me about it. What is it?
So Mars is a technology transfer incubator organization in Ontario. It's located in Toronto. It was started off by John Evans, who's a very distinguished Canadian who sadly passed away recently. It's called the Medical and Related Sciences District. Their role is to take discoveries that come out of universities and help transfer them into small companies. Secondly, to actually take small companies that are in Ontario and help them grow Thirdly, to have access to talent, both management, capital, and also our ideas that would help companies grow. So really, it's a technology incubation, innovation, commercialization entity, and I was very fortunate to serve on that board for a few years.
Understood. Another quick question for you. You went to you taught at University of Ceylon in Paradenia. I had to look that up. I didn't actually know where it was. In Sri Lanka. Can you and you went to UC Davis after that. Can you speak a bit more about your experience outside of Canada?
Yes, I was very fortunate because, first of all, I grew up in Sri Lanka. I spent a couple of years in England as a child when my father was studying. I was in California for 2 years, and of course in Canada. I consulted for about 100 companies around the world when I was a professor in engineering. When I was vice president, research, and more particularly president, I spent a lot of time promoting Canadian universities, University of Alberta in particular, in many, many countries, particularly in Asia, China, India, South America. I'm also a member of the board of Bank of Nova Scotia and the board of Magna. These are two leading Canadian companies that have significant international operations. And so I've been very fortunate in my life to really have had a chance to live and work and interact with people from many countries and cultures.
Thank you.
Now we'll have Ms. Ruby Sahoda.
Hello, Dr. Samasa-Guerrera. Thank you so much for being here with us today. My question follows up on what my colleague was just referring to, the places that you've lived in the world. From your resume, it seems like you may have grown up in Sri Lanka, spent quite a lot of time in California, and in various provinces around Canada, and like you were now stating, around the world as well. How do you think this experience of living in different places or having grown up in a different place may shape your qualifications when it comes to this appointment?
Well, I think if you look at the condition, the criteria that I set out, one of the things that I think is important is the fact that we want to ensure, at least through this process, that there is a representation of minorities, of linguistic minorities, ethnic minorities, First Nations, Indigenous people. I think that by having traveled and lived in many parts of the world, I have perhaps cultural sensitivity, the ability to understand people from different cultures, and also to assess and perhaps look for the contributions that people of diverse backgrounds make to Canada in particular, and perhaps that would inform my ability to look at the CVs, the resumes, the references that are provided in support of those individuals. So I think that I could bring that perspective to my task.
Through your work at the University of Alberta or UBC, what kind of mechanisms did you try to put in place so that you had that could meet that type of objective there?
Well, I think there were two things that the University of Alberta, certainly as president, that I focused on. At UBC, I was vice president research, so I had a very different portfolio. As president, there were a couple of things that we were working very hard on. First of all, to significantly increase the access for Aboriginal students. As you know, they're very underrepresented in many Canadian universities, and we had, I would say University of Alberta was one of the most successful universities in enhancing access of Aboriginal students to not only undergraduate programs but professional programs, law, medicine, and so on. Secondly, we were very concerned with the business of access in general for low-income students, and particularly students who came from families where their parents perhaps had not gone to university. So we did a lot towards raising money for scholarships, bursaries, and also providing students with support so that they were successful in universities. In the university. As you can imagine, University of Alberta is a very large institution, so that's a challenge. The other one was for students who come from small rural communities where there were maybe no more than 3,000 or 4,000 students. These students were not accustomed to big city life. And so again, that was an example where we help students coming from these minority backgrounds to succeed. Finally, one of my roles at University of Alberta was to increase the proportion of international students to the University of Alberta, because I believe that they brought with them the opportunity for Canadians to understand cultural diversity and also to enrich the lives of our Canadian students, but again to provide international students from a range of backgrounds, again the opportunity to study at one of Canada's leading universities.
Okay, thank you. And our last questioner will be Mr. Blake Richards.
Good. Thank you. Appreciate you being here virtually with us. And certainly, as many others have said, very impressed with your very impressive set of academic credentials and experience, much like the other two candidates that we've had before us. And I'm sure you're very dedicated to the task that you've got, well, somewhat before you, somewhat behind you already, I guess. But I guess I'm very firmly of the belief that the only people who should be making assessments and selecting senators should be the Canadian electorate in elections. Now, of course, recognizing the constitutional situation that we have now, Alberta does have a senatorial selection process that's been used. So actually, we've held a few election processes, senatorial selection under the Senatorial Selection Act in Alberta, and two different prime ministers have chosen to appoint senators chosen through that process. Of course, the Chrétien and Martin Liberals chose to ignore the choices made by Albertans in those processes, but we have seen them appointed. And so, I know that you can't speak as to your opinion on whether that's the appropriate way or choices that have been made by the government. You're speaking to the process that you're a part of. But I am obviously disappointed when we've heard the Minister of Democratic Institutions on more than one occasion, and also her parliamentary secretary, when I asked this question in the House of Commons, indicate that that they didn't really see merit to an election process. They felt that it should be a merit-based process, and therefore somehow an election wasn't a merit-based, which I find really troubling, to say the least. Certainly when asked this question at the Senate committee, the minister specifically indicated when asked about Mr. Mike Shake, who would actually be the next person that would be appointed should that election process that's taken place in Alberta be followed, that he was more than welcome to apply, just like anyone else, that there was really no merit to the fact that 300,000 plus Albertans had chosen to select him to be their senator. So I wondered what your sense is, should in a future appointment that you have to make recommendations where there has been a senatorial selection process, whether that be that one in Alberta or whether there's another province that chooses to set up such a process up, and that there is therefore people that are in place that have been selected and chosen by the electorate in their provinces. What would you do in terms of I know you're bound by the process that you're a part of, and you can't comment on your opinion on this thing, but you certainly can give an indication as to what you would do in terms of looking at the merit of that individual based on having been chosen by the province that they would represent in the Senate. How would you assess that as part of the merit, and when considering a candidate, if that was to be the case in future appointments?
Go ahead. Short question, Doctor.
Sorry, it was meant.
Yes, let me say that the criteria that have been laid out are very clear. We cannot deviate from that. That's our mandate. We would look at every single individual based on the merits, what their contributions are. Clearly, if they have been considered, worthy candidates by their communities, that perhaps will be reflected in their letters of reference, in their achievements. But we certainly would have to treat every individual who applies in the second phase equally, purely on the basis of the criteria criteria that are before us that are very clearly set out in the terms of reference.
So it sounds as though basically the process is built in such a way that there, much like the comments that have been made by the Minister and the Parliament Secretary, that there really would be seen as no merit to someone being selected by their fellow citizens in an election process. That's unfortunate. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Doctor. We really appreciate you being here today. I know you're just looking at your curriculum vitae. You have a lot of things. You're pretty busy, and as I think all the committee's members said, a great Canadian. So we appreciate you offering more service to the country, and we'll let you get back to work.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for your kind words. I am, let me say in concluding, I am very honored to serve Canada. I'm very committed to this country. This is a great country with a great democracy, and I am just very, very privileged to have a chance to meet with all of you. And I'd like to thank you all for your very kind questions, for your comments, for your thoughtfulness, and for the opportunity to engage in this way. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you. So just while they're transitioning the mic over to committee business, I'll just give you a few updates to the committee. Our research has been very busy, and so we actually have 4 more documents coming probably tomorrow. One is just a number of, and I assume we will just let these be public as we did the other research. The first one is just follow up to questions that we answered that came up during our discussions that we asked the researcher to follow up on. Second is a bit of a study on daycare, on childcare centers in other jurisdictions. A third is on electronic voting. And then there's a fourth paper that was actually done by the House of Commons, by the procedures clerk that offered their services to us. And that's a bit, we asked them what might hypothetically go before an alternate chamber if we had 2 chambers. And so there'll be a paper you'll get tomorrow on that. I was over the last week, it was very interesting. I was in Sweden for another reason, but the Parliament had, they only sat 3 days most of the time, and they had all their votes on Tuesday, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, and the voting was by electronic. So they have the same number of MPs we do, a few more actually, and they only gave them about 5 seconds, so everyone was glued to their seats. They did about 4 votes, all of in 60 seconds. They push their button, and then there's a whole board of green and red lights, and the totals come up. So they took a lot less time than we do. And you get maternity leave, you get 80% of your pay, and you get a replacement to fill in for you. And the ministers are not allowed to sit in the House because they're too busy. So they get a replacement. Only 50% of their ministers are elected, but of those that are elected, they get someone to replace them to do their House duties, to do their MP duties. Well, they're elected. Oh, I don't know who the replacement. I didn't, because that would be a good question, who they get the replacement. But someone replaces them so they can really do their ministerial work. And they have to go to the House to answer questions, but they're not allowed to partake in the House. So all that was very interesting. The chief electoral officer, we've bumped him because of our schedule stuff. He's suggested May 3rd or 5th he's available. We might want to, just to give him some certainty, pick one of those days and suggest it to him. And the other thing, as I mentioned while the speaker was here, well, 2 other things. One is that we have the main estimate sometime to do in the next couple of months for the House. And the last thing is we got a letter, I got a letter yesterday from the speaker on a different topic that you'll get very shortly. But basically he was asking that in the last House when they were doing the standing orders, he had made the point, and I'm sure it's in some documentation we got earlier, that he didn't have it's not clear enough authority he has to set the times of the sitting, et cetera, after an emergency like we had in the House. So he had suggested in our review of the upcoming standing orders that we make sure we address that. So when you see that letter, don't answer now, but like if you come back the next meeting to answer two questions. One is whether you would just like to do that separately and get it over with, or save it for the big review of standing orders. And the second question is, he suggests in the letter that they could propose some wording of a standing order that would work. For me, that would be great, but once again, it's up to the committee if you would like them to proceed that way. So we could discuss all that at the next meeting, I think, once you've seen the letter from him. So now we're on to, sorry, Mr. Chan.
Maybe this is something that we might want to simply put to the subcommittee or to the steering committee, just to take it off.
Okay.
Spending too much time here on that. If that's
okay?
acceptable to the opposition.
All those things? Okay. Okay, good. So now for the remainder of this meeting, last 20 minutes or so, we have committee business. And Mr. Reid.
Thank you. Would it be possible to return to the motion that I'd had before this?
If that's the will of the committee, go ahead.
Okay.
I had the floor at the end of the last meeting on that one.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was a speaker list.
Sorry?
Can we get a speaker's list on that motion? So I think Mr. Graham had the floor. Sorry, I
Was
think
there
Mr.
any
Graham
more?
had the floor, and then is there
Was
anyone
a
else who
speakers
wants
list
to
after
speak?
Mr. Graham?
No.
I think Mr. Reid, you wanted to speak?
Refresh my memory, Chair, but I believe the reason, I just want to be clear in my own mind, the reason we're doing this motion instead of mine is that this flowed from our actual discussions and from the hearing, correct? And so we're cleaning that up before we get back to because my motion's been around forever, and at some point we got to wrap that sucker up. So I just want to be clear that it hasn't been thrown away. We're just doing this one in order of precedence, and then mine will still tuck in behind.
Yours hasn't been thrown away. We're not doing, I wasn't doing any precedence, just what the committee wants to do. So whatever the committee would like to do.
Okay, no, I think actually I wanted to be clear we're all on the
Yeah.
same page. I think I had actually acquiesced to that recognition. I just wanted to reaffirm, just make sure. It's always better to reaffirm these things now than later on say, hey, yeah, what about? Thanks, I'm good.
Okay, so we'll continue discussion on, maybe I should read the motion. That the federal members of the Independent Advisory Board for Senate appointments be invited to appear before the committee before the end of March 2016 to answer all questions relating to their mandate and responsibilities. And when the committee left off at the last meeting in the middle of discussion, Mr. Graham had the floor, and we'll let him continue and take a speaking list. Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Chair. When we
Mr.
left
Chan.
off last meeting, we had not yet voted on the motion to call the witnesses. We had called Understanding Order 111 to address the scope of their mandate rather than their competence to carry it out. Now, David Christopherson referred to this lack of a vote as a big mistake as we walked out of the room, a comment which I found regrettable, as I do, in fact, have a good deal to say on the topic and appreciate having the time to say it. It's about the longest you'll ever hear me. So it is my understanding that the Minister's imminent appearance here in 2 days is specifically to handle the very questions my colleagues want answered, and I am looking forward to that meeting. However, there is a very important element of politics being played here by the members opposite. Before I get to the Conservative motion, I want to take a moment to refer to the New Democratic Party's position, the big mistake, if you will. The NDP has never made any secret of their disdain for the Senate as an institution, and it is thus not in Mr. Christopherson's political interest to do anything whatsoever that would facilitate the process of replacing senators, Constitution be damned. The Constitution Act is unambiguous. There shall be one Parliament for Canada, consisting of the Queen, an upper house styled the Senate, and the House of Commons. So the NDP's position that the Senate must not exist is a purely political one, not based on any form of reality. I'll get to that a little later. Bringing back these now 3 appointees, whom we all agree are extraordinarily well qualified people for the roles to which they have been assigned to address their mandate, serves then only to politicize the issue for the NDP. It creates a forum to go after the Senate rather than after those the government has charged with improving the system we are fundamentally obligated to have under the Constitution, whether we like it or not. As it happens, I do like the Senate, in principle, and believe it has a fundamental and inherent value to our process, so long as it is neither time nor term limited, nor is it elected. But while something I look forward to discussing at another time, that is not the subject of this particular intervention. For Mr. Reid, he is frustrated, and frankly, understandably, that the standing order under which we called Madame la Belle and Dean Chitra is very limited in its scope. These are order and council appointments, and the standing orders permit us to call these appointments for the purpose of evaluating their qualifications and competence to perform the duties of the post to which he or she has been appointed. The rule is there logic suggests, to ensure that we ensure the government is making good hires. The policy decisions are not those of the appointees, but rather of the government itself, and Standing Order 111 is not intended to turn appointments into pawns in larger political games. It is worth noting, though, that in reviewing the records of this committee in the last Parliament, I could find only 2 motions to call anyone under Standing Order 111. One is for Richard Fujarchuk, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his name, the parliamentary law clerk, on May 28, 2013. Called outside of the hours of a regular meeting for just 30 minutes, this is the one motion the Conservatives agreed to. While nobody on this side of the room knows how many motions were introduced and defeated, under the Conservatives' draconian use of in-camera meetings, I would be hard-pressed to believe no attempts were ever made. The second reference was in June of last year, in the dying days of the 41st Parliament, when Mr. Christopherson moved a motion to call the new Speaker of the Senate to test the qualifications. While I can't imagine the conversation would have been very interesting under these standing orders, presumably it was to make another political anti-Senate pitch, rather than addressing the qualifications of the individual named. It could have only gone something like this. Senator, are you a senator? Why, yes, I am. Well, then, by gosh, you meet the qualification standard. Regardless, the government of the day voted down the motion without any public debate, and with that... What's that? And with that, the record of the standing order at this committee in the most recent Parliament was, frankly, abysmal. I don't personally believe in killing motions without considering them. Indeed, having 10 days off the Hill in the real world, to think about it has given me plenty of opportunity to ponder and put my thoughts down in writing. We have shocked our friends across this room on several occasions already by doing things like listening and accepting, or at least debating, motions and ideas. We agreed to call the minister, something that our predecessor government would never have done based on an opposition motion. It had to be their own idea to be a good idea. Members on this side will certainly not always agree with our friends on the other side of the small room, nor will we always disagree. And for many of us, our instinct is to try to agree more than we disagree. I, at least, believe that a small part of making this place more family-friendly is treating our colleagues and their ideas with respect, and debating them on their merits, not their colors. I believe in cooperation and coming to the best results based on the best ideas with the best information. Sometimes, though, we will simply not agree. And on Mr. Reid's motion, this is, unfortunately, one of those times. It does not mean that Sunny Ways is clouded in. It simply means I don't agree with the motion. And so I wanted to debate the motion on its merits. I listened carefully to Mr. Reid's 1,200-odd second commentary on why he felt this motion was important. My point is not to suggest that he does not believe what he said. I believe he truly does, notwithstanding anything that happened in the 41st Parliament. The Conservatives' position on the Senate has always been crystal clear. It is not to appoint any senators until the Senate withers and dies.
Sorry, the translators are having a little problem. If you could just talk a little slower.
Sure, I will. Like Mr. Regan, I can speak at 200, gusting to 400. Well, that's a... Or is it that we have... Okay, so I'll restart this paragraph. It is the Conservatives' position on the Senate has not always been crystal clear. It is not to appoint any senators until the Senate withers and dies by pure attrition. Or it is to have what they called a Triple E Senate for equal, elected, and effective. Or it was to appoint elected senators, at least until they stopped liking the results of the elections. Or it really was to not have senators or a Senate. Or was it to appoint partisan hacks in a hurry when the government was suddenly in danger of falling, and then deal with the consequences, of which there have been many, not all of which have made the news? I am sure all of my honourable colleagues in this room are careful to only claim per diems when they are eligible to do so, for example, and that nobody here claims lunch on sitting Tuesdays or Thursdays in recognition of the wide and delicious assortment of senators we have here. As a staffer attending the Standing Joint Committee on the Library of Parliament's first meeting of the second session of the 41st Parliament, I was surprised to hear one of these highly qualified Conservative senators from the class of 2008 state, when the routine motion to order lunch, much like ours, was moved, and I quote directly from Hansard, "Please don't move it yet. With the AG moving in on us, if you and I had lunch, we could not claim a per diem for today." Because surely the reason not to claim a per diem is because there's a looming audit by the Auditor General, not because it is the right thing to do. Now, forgive me for thinking that the Conservatives do not have a great deal of credibility on any question relating to Senate appointments. Liberals, too, have not batted 1,000 on Senate appointments. There is no perfection in the system as it has existed. The system before us, the reason Mr. Jutras and Madame Labelle were here, is intended to begin the difficult task of fixing several problems that have cropped up in the Senate's past within the confines of the Constitution, a structure for which I have the utmost respect. These boundaries were explained to us in black and white only a year ago by the Supreme Court in a reference we are no doubt all familiar with, which reads, in part, "The Senate is one of Canada's foundational political institutions. It lies at the heart of the agreements that gave birth to the Canadian Federation." The problems are simple. The system of the Prime Minister picking a senator out of the clear blue sky or red sky, depending on the flavor of the government of the day — orange skies never seem to be in the forecast — is not a particularly good system. We get some phenomenal senators and we get some special cases. The terror of having any more senators claim expenses to which they were not entitled or otherwise cause embarrassment to the last Prime Minister meant that senators simply stopped being appointed by that last Prime Minister. So back to the attrition plant they went. The Prime Minister we have, seeing that the Senate's value exists only as an independent and nonpartisan body, ejected Liberal senators from the Liberal caucus, telling them to get on with the independence on which the relevance of their jobs depends. I can attest to the effectiveness of this on a personal level. In spite of my years on the Hill, I barely know the names of the senators, have met few of them, and couldn't tell you what province or party most of them are from without doing a bit of research. It is a separation that I value. This leads us to several structural problems, however. The Senate is a legislative body much like this one. I serve for the moment on 2 committees, as do most of my colleagues here, as well as on the executive of 2 sub-caucuses and an interparliamentary group. The Senate is much the same. The sheer volume of work to do requires senators. The last senator standing would be a very busy person indeed, serving on every standing committee, having impressive monologues on every bill brought forward, getting deep into philosophical discussions of the bathroom mirror, and so forth, except for the lack of any quorum, the lack of anyone to second any bills, or a speaker to even recognize them. It is simply a matter of necessity to have senators within the confines of the Constitution as it exists. While the NDP wants to abolish the Senate, the Supreme Court was clear. The abolition of the Senate requires the unanimous consent of the Senate, the House of Commons, and the legislative assemblies of all Canadian provinces. And the Conservatives' occasional wish for an elected Senate, too, requires constitutional amendments. Again, I cite the Supreme Court reference. The implementation of consultative elections and senatorial term limits requires consent of the Senate, the House of Commons, and the legislative assemblies of at least 7 provinces representing, in the aggregate, half of the population of all the provinces. Even term limits crashes into the constitutional amendment brick wall. A change in the duration of senatorial terms would amend the Constitution of Canada by requiring a modification to the text of Section 29 of the Constitution Act of 1867. In the face of all these constitutional requirements, the Conservative government was faced with total paralysis, choosing instead to leave seats vacant, close their eyes, stick out their collective tongues, and block their ears shouting na 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 na, rather than looking for plausible, realistic, and constitutional solutions. Now, I got my first start in politics at a rather young age when previous federal and provincial leaders thought reopening the Constitution was a good idea. And I don't think it is a great stretch to say the constitutional wrangling of the 1990s did our national unity a whole lot of good. I don't wish the reopening of the Constitution on anyone. It is a particularly heinous kind of curse, and is not something that should ever be taken lightly. We must, therefore, work within the confines of the Constitution. It requires us to have a Senate. It requires senators to be appointed by Her Majesty's representative here in Canada on the advice of our Prime Minister. It is, however, silent on where the Prime Minister takes his advice on the matter. And that is an issue the Independent Advisory Board for Senate Appointments, struck by order in council and thus subject to Standing Order 111, seeks to resolve. The Prime Minister is still ultimately responsible for the final choice, much like the Supreme Court justices, but having a highly qualified advisory panel offer educated and researched suggestions without a partisan lens can only serve to improve the quality of our sober second thinkers. This is different from electing senators, as the Supreme Court ruling makes clear. Introducing a process of consultative elections for the nomination of senators would change our Constitution's architecture by endowing senators with a popular mandate which is inconsistent with the Senate's fundamental nature and role as a complementary legislative chamber of sober second thought. That's directly from the Supreme Court. Sober second thought, in my mind, does not refer to the lack of imbibed alcohol. If that was a qualification, we would have our second debating chamber made up of me and a handful of other MPs who prefer not to drink. No, sober second thought refers to the lack of private or personal interest for the legislator. A senator who needs to please a political party or think about their re-election or what they will do in a post-Senate career loses that independence from personal interest, and so an elected or term-limited senator cannot meet the intent of sober second thought. Other Senate reforms, such as exploring whether senators should be allowed to continue working as anything other than senators, potentially clouding the sobriety of their independence, are plausible, but that outside of the scope of this particular debate. If we get into the weeds with the members of the advisory board about who they do and who they do not consider an acceptable senator, we prejudice the very process they are charged with following. We tell senator applicants what to tune in their CVs to appeal to the particular board members. We compromise the very independence of the advice. They have their own mandate given to them by the government, which gives clear instructions. Beyond that, it is their judgment, and we should not invite a subjective judgment into debate amongst each other, or air their internal deliberations for the public to see. As with any hiring process, those not selected deserve the respect of not having their rejection on the public record. Each advisory board member will have to draw their own conclusions and do their own thinking as they consider who to suggest as our next senators to the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister will have to fulfill his constitutionally mandated role of making that final decision. Standing Order 111 exists for a reason. When we call an order in council appointment here, it is to discuss whether or not they are qualified and competent to exercise the duties to which they have been named. If we wish to inquire more deeply into those issues, we can call a minister, and we have done exactly that. She will be here in just 2 days, and I, for one, will be voting no on Mr. Reid's motion to recall these members. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Reid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My intervention last time, so I am told by Mr. Graham, is 1,200 seconds long, so I had to look that up. It's 20 minutes, but for those who are interested, it's also 1.2 million milliseconds and 1.2 billion nanoseconds. So,
did you get that, Katie?
Anyway, so I'll just respond briefly to this. I am hoping we'll have a chance to have a vote today. There are a couple of things actually that are factually wrong in what Mr. Graham said, and I thought I'd just draw his attention to a bit of that. Elections are not actually forbidden in the reference ruling the Supreme Court made 2 years ago. I invite him to reread it. He'll see that federal enabling legislation is ruled as being ultra vires, or outside the federal government's powers, federal parliament's powers. There was nothing indicating that the Alberta Senatorial Selection Act, for example, was unconstitutional, nor that the choices made under that act, such as Mike Shake, to whom my colleague was referring, a senator in waiting from Alberta, who will, unless Prime Minister Trudeau doesn't care about democracy, will be appointed to the post to which he was elected in an advisory election. There's nothing unconstitutional about that. The Alberta government still has up on its website the fact that Mike Shake is a senator in waiting. We have several senators right now who are senators sitting in the Senate right now who were elected through that process. So Senate elections are entirely constitutional as long as they're done the right way. And the right way has been indicated through the process adopted by Alberta, and I hope, frankly, adopted by the provinces in time, one that could indeed be the system by which Canada's Senate becomes democratized in every province and ceases to be a 19th century institution. I should mention as well that if one rereads, and I invite Mr. Graham and anybody else to do so, the Confederation debates, which are available on a website to which I've contributed called primarydocuments.ca. You can read and go through and take a look at the Confederation debates, and you'll discover that many of the fathers of Confederation were actually advocates of an elected Senate. The reason that the Senate became an appointed body, historically speaking, is because it was a way of providing jobs to the people who were in the Legislative Council of the Province of Canada, who otherwise would have opposed. In other words, they were bribed by Senate seats. That's a matter of historical record, which was brought up actually several times in the course of the first Parliament of the New Dominion of Canada, in which the members debated as to whether or not Sir John A. had handed out the bribes to the former legislative councillors as per his secret agreement with the members of the other party in the pre-Confederation Parliament of the Province of Canada. So just to get the record straight on that. Look, the trouble with what Mr. Graham is suggesting here is we're going to get the minister in on Thursday. Every question we have will be resolved. Well, and therefore we don't need to bring back the members of the advisory committee to answer substantive questions about what they're doing, how they're conducting their affairs. I'll just say several things. One is these are people who have demonstrated discretion. I think we would all agree they're very discreet people. They know when they have to stop answering a question. Just as when we bring a minister here, they have to know, well, this is the point at which it's a cabinet confidentiality. I can't go beyond that. We trust in their competence. I don't think that Mr. Graham would dispute that their competence, their ability to know when they need to refrain from answering some aspect of a question that would involve a violation of one of the secrets they're entrusted with. So I have no fear there, and I don't think he needs to have any fear either. But the other problem we've got is the minister is going to come here, and there's every chance, I mean, I don't know, it's not Thursday yet, but there's every chance that she's going to get here and say, well, I'm not privy to some of this information. For example, the question I asked today, how many organizations have you been in touch with, and was it the three permanent national members of the committee, or was it the provincial members who went out and contacted these individuals? Something that I think is quite germane to the issue of whether or not these are individuals or organizations that represent what kind of interests they represent. So, well, the minister, I don't think the minister would know that. Maybe she will, but there's every chance she won't. After all, this is supposedly an independent advisory board, and if we take the process as actually working the way that it's said to work, then presumably she wouldn't. So we actually have questions like that that she can't answer. A series of questions will simply go unanswered. And look, you know, it becomes hard to believe after we've seen every time I try to raise a substantive question, it gets shut down. I do thank you, by the way, Mr. Chair. I thought you handled it right this time. You gave the witness the choice of answering as opposed to saying she couldn't do so. I've never approved of that technique whenever a chair does it. But the constant points of order, you can't ask this question, you can't ask that question. Well, if we accept that the standing order is the reason why, then the solution is bring them back under a different standing order where we can seek answers to these questions, and we'll actually get a substantive response. My expectation is on Thursday we will be disappointed simply because either A, time will run out. The minister, after all, has to answer questions on this issue and on a number of other issues. She has 1 hour to do so. And we'll be dealing with, for example, the issue of legislative reform, electoral reform. Whether we change our voting system, what her system is, there won't be much time to deal with this unless we bring her back. So I'll just say now that in the event it turns out she can't deal with these questions and this is defeated today, I'll be bringing back a version of the same motion to accomplish the goal in light of the new facts of having not received full answers from the minister, not because of ill will, but because of time constraints and lack of knowledge of things she simply is not, to which she is not privy. And likewise, if we find that we're unable to probe deeply enough into the Senate and that process with the minister because we're dealing with the other issue that's on her plate, then I'll be asking for her to come back as well. So having said that, I'll stop now, and we could either go to a vote or to a different participant, depending on what the speakers list looks like.
Mr. Chan, you're on the list, and we have about 1 minute left.
I simply had a simple question of how many more are currently on the list, Madam Clerk?
Well, now there's Mr. Christopherson just added to the list after you.
One more on my side. One of you.
Oh, and Ms. Sahota.
Glad to see we've got that filled up again, and we can make sure that no vote will occur.
Well,
Okay, we got about 30 seconds
you were
left.
screwed no matter how you did that.
Mr. Chan.
I didn't choose to talk out the last 8 minutes, Mr. Reid.
Oh,
so
that's the reason you asked Ms. Sahota to join the speakers list.
no,
then.
there's actually a substantive reason for me. I won't be available on Thursday, unfortunately. So if we come back to the motion, I just simply want our side to have the opportunity to respond. Look, I was simply wrap up and simply say I actually thought both theses that came both from Mr. Graham and Mr. Reid were particularly educational, and a lot of the substantive points that I had originally wanted to address, I thought Mr. Graham did an excellent job in covering them. In terms of, I know at the last meeting, David, you had lots of commentary about competency, and I think David Graham did a great job in terms of highlighting that at the end of the day we are bound by a particular set of constitutional rules that require us to ultimately deal with the matter in which we've are ultimately trying to deal with it. You already know our position, and I know that we're at the 1 o'clock point. So I will simply cede the floor back to I believe Mr. Christopherson and then Ms. Sahota when the matter comes back up.
Okay. See you Thursday.